In the depths of the dark forest in the land of Harmonia, a war rages between the kingdom of men and the forces of the Demon Emperor. But the battle has been decided, the Demon Emperor defeated, and his armies of undead scattered to the winds. Of all his forces, only a single skeleton remains, tireless and determined to challenge the heroes of man. Skul, the Hero Slayer, is an action platformer with rogue-lite elements. In it, you play as Skul, a tiny undead skeleton fighting back against the armies of a powerful fantasy kingdom. At the start of the game, your leader has been captured, and it's up to you to fight your way through forests, castles, and dungeons to try and rescue him. Like most action platformers, you'll make your way through a series of areas, jumping, dodging, and dashing across various platforms in order to progress. As you maneuver around, you'll need to defeat all of the available enemies on the map in order to unlock the door to the next area. As you explore each area, you'll need to challenge first a mini-boss and then later a final boss before you're allowed to make your way to the next level. In between these confrontations, you'll need to fight normal enemies in order to collect resources such as gold, open chests in order to collect treasure, and visit small rest areas where you can purchase equipment, magical items, and unlockables. And, seeing as this is a roguelite, the order in which you encounter levels, the layout of the levels themselves, and the rewards that you receive for completing them is randomized during every new playthrough. Now, what's interesting about this game is that in addition to money and items, you will also occasionally find the discarded skulls of other undead warriors as a reward for completing an area. And this is actually one of the game's major features, as Skul, the titular character, as an undead monster, is capable of popping off his own head and then replacing it with the skull of any other undead that he finds. And doing so allows him to inherit both their weapons and their skills. So, picking up the skull of a soldier might give you a sword and a dash attack, and picking up the skull of an archer might give you a bow and the ability to fire arrows at long distance. And where things get really interesting is that you're not limited to just one skull. You can carry up to 2 at a time and swap back and forth between them on a short cooldown, meaning that you can mix and match different skulls for a variety of different tactics and situations. And some of the skulls can even be upgraded to better forms, getting more damage or more defense or even new special abilities. There's over 20 different types of skulls in the game, each one representing a different class with its own attack patterns and skills and special abilities to find and unlock. It's actually pretty impressive. And finally, like most roguelites, there's a permadeath element. Dying at any point will end your current run and send you back to the start of level 1, at which point you'll have to start all over with only your basic abilities. However, defeating enemies will reward you with upgrade crystals. These crystals can be spent to buy passive bonuses that will permanently increase your stats for any future playthrough. Now, what's the good and bad of Skul the Hero Slayer? Well, for starters, I really like the look of the game. It's got a solid pixel art aesthetic, all of the different skulls are nicely detailed, and a lot of the backgrounds in particular are very pleasant to look at. Enemy design is also good, with a large variety of soldiers and monsters for you to encounter, and most of them also have clear telegraphs or visual cues for when they're about to attack, which is important because a lot of battles have you facing multiple opponents attacking you from different directions. Sound design is also good with nice effects and background music. Plus, the game handles well too. Moving, attacking, jumping, dodging, all of it feels very natural and responsive, and the HUD does a reasonable job of showing you what effects and bonuses are applying to your character at any time. Although, managing your equipment can be a little tedious, as you'll often need to pull up the menu multiple times in order to compare items and bonuses. But probably the best thing about the game is the huge variety of skulls that you can collect, and the class-switching gameplay that is derived from that. As I mentioned before, the game has over 20 different types of skulls, from common up to legendary, and all of them handle completely differently from one another. Some focus on melee attack, some focused on range attack, others have powerful magical spells and abilities. It's a huge part of the game's appeal to find all of these different skulls and play around with them, and because you can have two of them at the same time to figure out which of them have synergistic abilities as well. And because the game is a roguelite, you never know which ones are going to be available to you, so it's in your interest to find and experiment with as many of them as you can. Now, as for downsides, I wouldn't say that I have any strong complaints about Skul the Hero Slayer. I don't think that there's any area that the game outright fails at. However, I do think there are some nuances to its design that warrant further explanation. For starters, like most roguelites, the game is hard. Enemies have predictable but ruthless attack patterns, and if you die, you have to start all the way back at the beginning. Now, that much is to be expected, but even amongst other contemporary roguelites, Skul has one of the harshest difficulty curves I've ever seen. As I mentioned before, the game has over 20 different kinds of skulls for you to find and collect, and really try to appreciate that for a moment, because keep in mind, all of those skulls don't just represent different weapons, they represent entirely different attack patterns. And it doesn't just change your attack speed and damage and reach, it changes even more fundamental abilities as well. What skull you have equipped can change how fast you move, how high you can jump, even how far or how many times you're able to dodge. And that's not even including the special abilities, which can be randomized as well. And this means that the skill ceiling for even just getting into the game is incredibly high, because every time you play, you pretty much have to master an entirely new moveset. And because the game is a roguelite, the randomness of it further complicates things. As I mentioned before, different skulls have levels from common to legendary. Now, normally only low-level items are available in low-level areas, but if the game's RNG drops a legendary skull for you in one of the earliest areas and you pick it up, you jump way ahead on the power curve. Because not only are legendary items of better quality than common items, but you don't have to spend extra resources upgrading them in order to keep them competitive, which means that you can spend more of your currency buying items or consumables. And all of this combines to create a situation where, even compared to other roguelites, the quality of an individual run in Skul can vary wildly. Where getting a high level or familiar piece of gear early on is a much more enjoyable experience than if you have to fight the RNG the whole game. Still, despite my concerns about the randomness, I did have a lot of fun with Skul the Hero Slayer. Grinding through the different areas to find all the skulls and test out their new abilities and upgrades did take some of the sting out of my constantly getting killed. I would give it 3 out of 4 stars and easily recommend it to anybody that likes action roguelites. However, anybody looking for just a more general platformer or adventure game, be warned, this game has a ridiculous learning curve, and the randomized elements mean that your personal progress is not guaranteed. Alright, well, thanks once again for listening. You take care of yourselves, and remember, don't lose your head.